Hello. I want to thank you for taking the opportunity to listen to this presentation. My name is Dr. Carl Smith. I'm a chiropractor in Spokane, Washington. I've been in practice for the last 23 years. I have a busy practice. He's about 200 to 300 patients a week. The purpose of this presentation is to introduce you to a new technology of stabilized redox signaling molecules and a product called ASEA. A patient approached me about this technology way back in 2009, and I just politely told her that I wasn't interested. Finally, in March of 2011, I saw some amazing results with this new technology, results that were significant enough that I decided to research this and find out what this was all about. Before we get started, I want to open with a disclaimer that ASEA is not a treatment or cure for any diagnosed medical condition or disease. Only FDA-approved drugs can claim treatments or cures, and ASEA is not an FDA-approved drug. We'll talk about ASEA and the FDA a little later on in this presentation. So before we tell you what it is, it's really important that you understand what it is not. ASEA is not a vitamin, it's not a mineral, it's not an antioxidant, it's not some new exotic juice or berry, and it's also not a new kind of water. A lot of times when I'm explaining this to people, they'll say, oh, is this kind of like? And the answer is always no. It really isn't like anything that's ever been out there before. So what is it? It's the world's first and only redox supplement. I'd never heard of redox molecules and redox signaling before ASEA. I know a lot about it now, and hopefully when you get through this presentation, you'll understand how the chemistry of redox plays a big part in the health and healing of your cells. When I first looked at this, I went to a website called pubmed.gov. That's the largest database for online refereed medical journals on the planet. I didn't want to read anything that the company had to say about their product. I want to find out if there was real science behind this. Well, I started looking in March of 2011, and it turns out at that time there were about 6,800 articles published on redox signaling. Well, that definitely let me know this really was an area of science that I knew nothing about, that was out there and something was happening. Well, I started going through those articles and reading article after article until I had an understanding of what redox signaling was all about. Since then, now there's about 11,000 articles that have been published. There's about 100 to 150 new articles coming out every single month. Dr. Naidu just published a book, Redox Life, that is designed for college-level chemistry and biochemistry students to introduce them to the science of redox signaling. So redox signaling is really gaining traction in the academic world. So what is redox signaling? If you look at a cell is basically a bag of salt water. And inside that cell, there's a lot of different things that happen depending on what kind of a cell it is. One thing all cells have in common are mitochondria. They're the power plants for the cell. They produce an energy molecule called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. They make ATP through a very complex series of chemical reactions known as the Krebs cycle. During that Krebs cycle, you also produce these two sets of what we now call redox signaling molecules. When I learned the Krebs cycle 25 years ago, we learned that this was just a waste product. It was just salt water and had no significance whatsoever. Well, about 20 years ago, scientists discovered, wait a minute, when those little molecules come off the mitochondria, they're different. For a very short amount of time, some of them just millionths of a second, some of them a second or two, there's actually some specific oxidative and reductive molecules that are formed. They set out to discover, why does the body make these molecules, what's their purpose, what's their function, and that has become the science of redox signaling. Well, what they've found out is that these molecules are foundational to the healing process of cells. If we didn't have them in that bioactive state for that short amount of time, some of these are only stable for millionths of a second, some of them are stable for a couple of seconds. But if we didn't have them in that state, our cells wouldn't have the ability to heal, and our cells couldn't survive. So the next question is, what do they do? The first set of molecules are antioxidant activators. Everybody knows what antioxidants are. Everybody knows that they're good for us. Well, what antioxidants actually do is they block something called free radical attacks. When these attacks are successful, they damage your cells. They cause inflammation at the cellular level. So antioxidants absorb those free radical attacks. Well, it turns out that antioxidants are kind of like a light bulb. A light bulb has to be lit up by electricity. An antioxidant has to be lit up by a redox signaling molecule before it can have the right charge to be able to successfully absorb a free radical attack. Well, it turns out we all have a lot of antioxidants that aren't being lit up. And as a matter of fact, we have more and more that aren't lit up as we age. And when you start supplementing with the activator or these redox molecules, you start to light up more antioxidants. The average person who begins to supplement with this will boost their antioxidant protection by 500%. Well, what does that mean to you and me? That means 500% more protection against inflammation. And we'll talk about why that's so important in just a minute. That all by itself is huge, but that's just half the story. The other half is immune system communication. The second set of molecules are immune system communicators. Your body is made up of trillions of cells. Those cells group together to form tissues. Those tissues form organs. Those organs perform functions. All that grouping together of cells requires communication within and between those cells. And this helps to facilitate that communication. So what does it take to have healthy cells? If you want to be healthy, you got to start at the cellular level. If you want to have a healthy heart, you better have healthy heart cells and so on. Well, first of all, our cells need to be protected. That's where your antioxidants come in. They protect you from those free radical attacks that cause inflammation. The second thing that happens is the cell's created, it performs a specific function. Over time, the cell gets old, it gets damaged. Something goes wrong with it, it develops a problem. Well, the second set of molecules, the immune system communicators, they detect cells with problems. When they detect a problem, they signal to initiate a healing response. If it's a small problem, it signals to bring nutrients in to repair that cell, get it back to 100%. If it's a big problem or it's an old cell that can't get repaired, that's beyond repair, they signal to destroy that cell and signal the surrounding tissue to replace it with a brand new healthy cell. So in essence, these molecules are responsible for protecting, detecting, repairing, and replacing damaged cells. If we're out of balance in that in any way, we'll end up with problems. If we don't have enough protection, then we end up with inflammation. Remember I said inflammation is bad. Well, wherever you have inflammation over a period of time, it'll eventually catch up with you. If we have it in our joints too long, they get stiff and aching. We call that arthritis. If you have it in your cardiovascular system, you'll eventually end up with plaquing and heart disease. If it's your digestive system, there's a whole host of problems you may have. You may have gastritis, you may have diverticulitis, you may have colitis. You ever notice how many diseases end in itis? Well, what does itis mean? That's right, inflammation of. And that's why antioxidants have received so much attention in the last 25 years, is they protect us against all those itises. So now we can boost that protection by 500% by lighting up dormant antioxidants that are already in your body. Now, if we're out of balance in the other half of the system, if detect, repair, replace isn't happening like it's supposed to, then we end up with a completely different set of problems. When unhealthy cells aren't detected, they're left on their own and they're given the chance to replicate. When unhealthy cells begin to replicate out of control, then we have problems like growths, tumors, and cancers, a completely different set of problems. So it takes a complete balance between these two systems to have healthy cells. Redox signaling molecules are the molecules that run those two systems. I hope you can see now how they're foundational to health. If we didn't have them in that bioactive form for that short amount of time, none of our cells could survive. You may ask yourself, well, hey, if all of my cells make these redox molecules, why would I ever need to supplement with it? Well, it turns out our cells are very efficient at producing redox molecules when we're young. We actually peak our efficiency around puberty. And every year after that, you make less and less and less. As you make less, your ability to protect, detect, repair, and replace damaged cells begins to diminish. It just becomes more difficult to heal as you age. Well, the real miracle we'll see is now for the first time in the history of the world, they've stabilized those reductive molecules, those oxidative molecules in their bioactive form and stabilize them to give them a shelf life for over a year. So now you can supplement directly with the molecules that you used to produce in abundance. And the result is your ability to protect, detect, repair, and replace damaged cells is brought to a whole new level. So the analogy I've been using with my patients is to show Extreme Home Makeover. I'm sure most of you have seen that. They take a beat-up home and they turn it into a palace in 1 week. And it's like a miracle what they can accomplish. The reason they're able to do that is they've got all the materials on site and they've got all the labor. They've got a crew of 1,000 people that volunteer around the clock to make this transformation happen. Well, repairing cells is kind of the same way. You need materials, but you also need labor. Now, materials we're all familiar with. That's the proteins, carbohydrates, fats, the vitamins, the minerals, the antioxidants, all the things that you eat in your diet and supplement with nutritionally are the building blocks and materials for cells. But nobody ever really talks about labor. The way labor is performed is every cell in your body makes redox molecules. Those molecules detect problems and then signal to put those materials to work. Well, what happens is when you're young, you've got all the materials and all the labor, and you heal like Extreme Home Makeover. But then all of a sudden you hit puberty, and every year after that, your labor force gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and there was nothing you could do about it. Imagine Extreme Home Makeover if only 5 people showed up instead of 1,000. Would they get done on time? It'd be a lot of work. That's kind of what your body goes through as you age. It just becomes more difficult to heal. Well, now for the first time in the history of the world, not only can we supplement with the materials, but you can also supplement with the labor. And when you get the materials and labor together, what I've seen in my practice in the last 3 years, people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond, they begin supplementing with ASEA and they start to heal like Extreme Home Makeover. The results have been nothing short of phenomenal. I think it's important to bring out that this was once thought impossible. When they stabilized these cells, they sent a letter to the University of Utah Research Medical Facility and said, hey, we've stabilized reactive oxygen species in their bioactive form. All the professors and scientists were adamant. They said, no, you haven't. That's impossible. It can't be done. These molecules are only stable for millionths of a second. They said, well, let us send you some. So they sent them some ASEA, and they put it through their multi-million-dollar mass spectrometer. And sure enough, they got a letter back saying, indeed, these are reactive oxygen species stabilized. Now, how did you do it? We'll talk about that in just a minute. So I hope you're beginning to see how this really is something different. It's not a new vitamin or a mineral or a juice or a berry. And not that there's anything wrong with those things. Those are all great materials and building blocks for building cells. But this is something different. This is the other half of the equation that's never been able to be addressed before. When I understood that, that's when I knew as a healer I had to start using this myself. It's almost like a paradigm shift. Now, we're not just focused on the materials, but we can also focus on the labor. When I understood that, I knew I had to start using it myself. I knew I had to start sharing this with my patients, and that's why I'm doing this presentation today.